Well, it's time to get going. Good morning. All that good fellowship in the back. Bill Sanders, Alex Weatherford. Hey. Yeah. Hey, Judy.
Hey, Wes.
Good to see you this morning.
Good to see you.
I know we are all enjoying this fall weather. Got a little extra pep in our step, as they say. All right, let me advance to my slide a little. It's on. While I'm getting these slides going, I want to make sure I mention this. We have got a new family that is moving to Lufkin. They're going to be here this morning. It's Patricia Pearson is her name, and her daughter is named Michelle Pearson. I don't think they're going to be here at Bible class, but they have relocated here to Lufkin. They're living at 205 Berry Road, which is right off 94 West, just outside the loop. If you step in their front yard, you're looking at the back of Dairy Queen, if you can kind of visualize where that is. But let's really make an effort to welcome them here this morning. Aha, there we go. Yeah, so Patricia and Michelle, they're going to need some help the end of this week moving. So just want to make sure I really mention those names. I want us to show them a lot of hospitality this morning when they get here. I think they'll be here for worship. Really want to make them feel a part of this church family. Thank you for being here this morning, continuing our study of Ecclesiastes. This study has really meant a lot to me, and I mean that with sincerity, not just because I'm the teacher, but studying Ecclesiastes is reminding me of the need to have perspective on life, to look at life through the lens that God would have me to look at life. It's helping me to behave better, to react better, to think better, to feel better. It doesn't mean that my problems disappear, but it helps me to have the right frame of mind and the right perspective. You know, so continuing in our study, looking at Solomon's journey through life. You know, he's left a lot of valuable notes and little nuggets of wisdom for us. It just makes sense for us to really apply ourselves to this so that we don't make the same mistakes that Solomon made in his life. Last week we talked about the futility of trying to find joy, satisfaction, and happiness through the pleasures that this life would have to offer. We're not going to go back and revisit that. We're going to pick up this morning. We're going to start by looking at wisdom, folly, but we're going to talk an awful lot this morning about work. We, in the United States, we have our identities wrapped up in what we do instead of whose we belong to. And many of you in here, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I'll be the first one to throw myself under the bus. I really had that was a struggle of mine for a number of years. My identity, I'll say that again, I found my identity in what I did. You hear me? Not in whose I belong to. We got to really make sure that we don't forget that we don't lose sight of it. I want to go ahead and start by reading Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 12 through 26. That's going to kind of be our text for this morning. And again, I'm reading out of the New American Standard. Everybody turn back there and say, "Hi, Becky." All right, verse 12. So I turned to consider wisdom, madness, and folly. For what will the man do who will come after the king except what has already been done? And I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I know that one fate befalls them both. And then I said to myself, as is the fate of the fool, it will also befall me. Why then have I been extremely wise? So I said to myself, this too is vanity, for there is no lasting remembrance of the wise man as with the fool, inasmuch as in the coming days all will be forgotten, and how the wise man and the fool alike die. So I hated life, for the work which had been done under the sun was grievous to me, because everything is futility and striving after the wind. Thus I hated all the fruit of my labor, for which I labored under the sun. For I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool? Yet he will have control over the fruit of my labor, for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun. This too is vanity. And in verse 20, therefore I completely despaired of all the fruit of my labor, for which I labored under the sun. When there is a man who has labored with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, then he gives his legacy to one who has not labored with them. This too is vanity and a great evil. For what does a man get in all his labor and in his striving with which he labors under the sun? Because all his days his task is painful and grievous. Even at night his mind does not rest. This too is vanity. There is nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. This also I have seen, that it is from the hand of God. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? For to a person who is good in his sight, he has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, while to the sinner he has given the task of gathering and collecting, so that he may give to one who is good in God's sight. This too is vanity and striving after the wind. Again, just to briefly recap last week, talked a lot about pleasures. Pleasure is pleasurable, but it's also fleeting, meaning it never satisfies. Nothing wrong with enjoying the pleasures in this life, but it's never going to give you that permanent satisfaction. It's never going to fill that void. It's temporal. You know, you enjoy it for a few moments, a few hours, then the feeling subsides, and you're still left feeling empty. Let's look at what Solomon says here in chapter 2. So I turned to consider wisdom, madness, and folly, for what will the man do who will come after the king except that which has already been done? I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. The wise man's eyes are in the head, but the fool walks in darkness. It seems here that Solomon is saying, you know what? The same fate, is going to come to both of them. Both of them have a grave problem, right? The wise man and the fool. I think the big idea that Solomon is getting at here is, even wisdom has its limitations, right? We can have all the answers. We can have things figured out to a degree, but there's still some things that we're just not going to know. You know, we're here on earth, God's in heaven, and then there's some things in this life that we're just not going to have answers for, no matter how hard we try. Continuation of this same thought here. Yet I know that one fate befalls them both. Then I said to myself, as is the fate of the fool, it will also befall me. Why then have I been extremely wise? And there's that phrase again. This too is vanity. 16 and 17. For there is no lasting remembrance of the wise man as with the fool. How does that make you feel? You know, to know that, you know, one day you're just going to be a memory at best. That's kind of sobering, isn't it? I'm an 80s kid. Batsel's probably an 80s kid, maybe late 70s, I don't know. But you know, the people that were popular in the 80s, the shows, the videos, the actors. You know, if I went in that high school class this morning and started dropping names from the 80s, those kids are clueless. Go in there and mention Elvis. Go in there and mention John Wayne. Do you think they're going to know who that is, Bubba? You know, as time goes by, people forget. Memories fade. That's kind of one of the ideas. As time goes by, people forget. It's kind of a sobering reality when you think about it. And how the wise man and the fool alike die. So I hated life, for the work which was done under the sun was grievous to me, because everything is futility and striving after the wind. Pretty good depressing stuff so far, right? Again, remember the big picture. Life with God has purpose. It has meaning. It has value. You take God out of the picture, yeah, you're going to be depressed. No meaning, no purpose, no value. Solomon continues, thus I hated all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun, for I must leave it to the man who will come after me. We'll probably talk a little bit about this some this morning, maybe in classes to come, but we've all known of families where this has happened. Mom, dad, they amassed a fortune, built an empire, only to leave it to some kid that squanders it, lives foolishly. Solomon and Rehoboam, perfect example. We'll talk about that later. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool? Again, Solomon, Rehoboam. Yet he will have control over the fruit of my labor, for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun. This too is vanity. And again, it's just this argument back and forth about living wisely versus living foolishly. So Solomon kind of shifts gears here around verse 20. He's been talking about wisdom and folly, and he's going to be talking about this quest to find this joy and satisfaction through work. And that's something that all of us in this room identify with, whether you're retired or not. And we're going to talk extensively about this morning, because it can be a trap for us, and I'll expand a little bit on what I mean by that. Therefore, I completely despaired of all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun. When there is a man who has labored with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, then he gives his legacy to one who has not labored with them. This too is vanity and a great evil. For what does a man get in all his labor and in his striving with which he labors under the sun? Because all his days his task is painful and grievous. Even at night his mind does not rest. This too is vanity. Talking about our work, our labor. There is nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and to tell himself that his labor is good. We derive a certain sense of satisfaction from our toil, our labor, in our careers and our jobs. But this also I have seen, that it is from the hand of God. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? A man that can find enjoyment in what he does and satisfaction, that's truly a gift from God. So here's where the lesson really starts for us here this morning. As I said before at the very beginning, this was a real struggle of mine for a number of years. I wish I could go back in my 20s and redo a few things, because I'd always heard about this. I'd heard sermons, I'd heard Bible classes, but I just never got it. The ability to experience joy is not related to what we do. I'm going to go out on a limb and say maybe men struggle with this more than women. I don't know. You ladies in here, if y'all want to chime in, please help me on this. But I think, as a general rule of thumb, men struggle with this a little bit more than women do. I struggled with this in my 20s, into my 30s. Even though I was a Christian, I was never happy at times in my career. I always fooled myself thinking, well, if only this would work out, then I'll be really, really happy. Then I'll be satisfied. Instead, what Solomon is saying is, he's like, look, guys, I wasted my life chasing after this same thing. You're not going to find joy necessarily. You're not going to find joy alone in what you do. The joy is going to come from knowing whose you belong to. And we all know that is God. God is the only one that can give us joy. Now, I'm not saying that we can't find joy and satisfaction and contentment in the work that we do. Absolutely. I think that that's a gift, that's a blessing. But I think that we have to wrestle with this from time to time in our life, just like I had to come to terms with it, and I had to step back and really do some examination in my own life and reevaluate. Why have I allowed my career? Why have I put so much stock in that? That's outside. Our outside circumstances are going to ebb and flow. Our outside circumstances should not determine the joy, the satisfaction, the peace, the contentment that we should feel on the inside, knowing that we belong to God. Sit there and think for a moment to yourself, all the people that you know, that you have known. Think about the society that we live in. People are looking for joy in what they do. People are trying to find joy in possessions, the things they have. I can't harp on this enough. The ability to experience joy is not related to what we do. It's a small component, probably in the big picture. But if there's anything that I can do to encourage somebody, I don't mind sharing my own struggle. Man, I made myself miserable for, well, that's probably too strong of a statement. I wasn't miserable because I've always been blessed with a wonderful wife and family. But I really, man, I don't know why this was such a struggle for me, but my joy has nothing to do with what I do. My joy comes in knowing that I belong to God and that I have a church family that loves me and that I get to serve and help people and share the gospel, the good news. That's where my joy should really come from. We experience the relationship of joy in several ways. Before I get into this, think about this for a moment. If all we did was base our joy upon what we do, what's going to happen when that's gone? What's going to happen when that career is ripped out from underneath you? What's going to happen when you got to sell the house because the bank's fixing to foreclose? What's going to happen when the stock market crashes? Again, I'm not saying that, hey, if God has blessed you with an amazing career and you love what you do, hey, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. Give God thanks and know that that is a gift and a blessing from God. You should not feel guilty if you love what you do. What I'm trying to do is kind of, teach us some of the lessons that Solomon left for us. We experience joy through salvation. I don't like to watch a lot of news anymore. I'll occasionally get my news from KTRE. It's local. It's not nearly as negative. But if you go to Fox News, ABC News, man, look at all the negativity. I mean, there is nothing on the news that is joyful, in my opinion. We get our joy from our salvation. We need to remember that. We need to continually do a better job of reminding ourselves of whose we belong to, what we have to look forward to, and the hope that we have. Katrina?
In my line of work, I see especially men, all the time who have lost their ability to work. Because of illness, because of disease, they've lost their ability to work. And I think it's really natural and normal, especially for a man, it's innate for them to be the provider, the financial provider. I think when we look at Scripture, the main thing is we see a man that should be a spiritual provider, a spiritual leader, the leader of his family spiritually. And to me, whenever I see a man who has that foundation, who has been that spiritual leader for his family, he's more likely to have that joy throughout a disease, throughout an illness that has prevented him to be able to work, because, like you're saying, his self-esteem does not come only from providing financially, but providing spiritually.
That's a great point. Very spot on, Katrina. I don't want to share a lot of examples and stories about myself. I really enjoy hearing from you guys as well. But at the age of 46, I've come to realize that when you get down to it, people don't really care what I do. People really don't care what I do. You know what they care about? In my opinion, is what kind of person I am, how I treat them. Am I a selfish person? Am I a self-centered person? Or am I a giving person? Am I a person that extends my friendship? Am I a person that's interested in their spiritual journey? Again, going back into my 20s, I was somewhat wrapped up in the career, the status, the prestige of certain careers and stuff. And I look back over my life and I've just seen it play out time and time again. People don't care about that. Don't misinterpret, don't misconstrue. I'm not saying that we shouldn't take pride in our careers and be the best we can. I mean, that's all, it has its place. But as a general rule, I just don't think people really care as much about that as we think they do sometimes. They care about who you are. They care about, do you have an interest in them, in their spiritual well-being, in their life? What kind of person are you? Again, getting back to the way that we experience joy, salvation. We get joy from knowing that we have hope for eternity. Man, I am so thankful that this isn't all that I have to look forward to. I mean, this world's somewhat in a mess right now, right? Would you agree? I'm glad that I don't have to think, well, you know, one day when the old clicker stops working, man, this is it. It's time for me to check out. I am joyful. I am thankful. I am grateful that I have something better to look forward to one day. No, I'm not in a rush to see my life end, but I get joy in knowing that something far better than what we're experiencing here on earth awaits me. And we should all get our joy and satisfaction and contentment and peace from knowing that. We can also derive a lot of our joy just from insight. As we study and apply the Scripture, we begin to realize, we begin to see this world in a totally different light. We begin to understand life in a way that the rest of the world just doesn't understand it. I get joy because I have spent time studying God's Word, praying for God to help me to understand, to have wisdom, to guide me. And that kind of insight, we don't get it from anywhere else. That's where joy comes from. Whether it's the best of days, the worst of days. We get joy from knowing that we have a Savior that loves us. We get our joy, our satisfaction from knowing that we have a church family that's always here for us, that's not going to let us go hungry, that's not going to let us freeze whenever we have a storm, that's going to take care of us, that's going to sit there and help us when our loved one is suffering in a nursing home with cancer. That's where we get our joy from. Our salvation, our hope, our insight, our love. Look at that, and I want you to really think about that. You know, nobody really knows what's going on in your life more than you do. Are you a truly joyful person this morning? You know, in our Wednesday night class, Lynn and Greg, we're going through the fruits of the Spirit in Galatians chapter 5, verse 22, 23, and I think this next week they're going to start talking about joy. But are you a joyful person? Are you an optimistic person? Are you a pessimistic person? I'm not asking you to answer out loud. You know who you are. You know what you are. A relationship with Christ is the only way we're ever going to find that satisfaction. And that's the stuff that Solomon was on this journey for. He was trying to find stuff that would satisfy. I like a good meal as much as anybody, but you know what? After an hour or 2 hours, 3 hours, that meal's really, it's just a memory, isn't it? I mean, you can eat a good meal, but it's not going to permanently satisfy you. A lot of things in this life can provide temporary satisfaction, but it's not that permanent satisfaction that comes through a relationship with Jesus Christ. We're satisfied in a relationship with Jesus Christ. We can experience that love, that joy, that peace. And I'm not teaching what do they say, health and wealth, prosperity type. I mean, we can have that right there and still have a difficult life. You hear what I'm saying? I can lose my job, I can have trouble with my kids, but I can still have love, joy, peace, satisfaction in my life if I truly, truly have a relationship with Jesus Christ. So I think the big thing that Solomon is trying to get across to us here, especially in Ecclesiastes, starting around verse 20 to 26, as he's talking about the fruits of our labor, our toil, is satisfaction, joy, and peace work from the inside out. That's the mistake that I was trying to make. I was trying to find in my 20s, more so than my 30s, but in my 20s, I was trying to find my joy through my work. It doesn't work like that. If you're the type of person that's trying to find joy from outside circumstances instead of inside, it's just, you're going to constantly be searching. Satisfaction, joy, peace, it's got to come from the inside. And when I'm talking about from the inside, it comes from a relationship with God. For to a person who is good in his sight, he has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, while to the sinner he has given the task of gathering and collecting, so that he may give to one who is good in God's sight. This too is vanity and striving after the wind. The essence of one's being is rooted in one's relationship with God. Solomon has a lot of good points that he makes in this journal for us. Satisfaction. We all want to be satisfied. That's a basic underlying need that we have as humans, is we just want to be satisfied. We need joy. We desire joy. We desire peace. But satisfaction is available to everyone here, irregardless of what they do. Bill's retired. Doyle's a minister. Mike's been in the forestry industry for a number of years. Engineers over here. A couple of probation officers in the house. That stuff is what we do. That stuff does not determine our satisfaction, our joy. Now, we can get a sense of satisfaction out of what we do. But I think the point that Solomon's trying to make, and the point that I want to make for us, is irregardless of what we do, we can all have that satisfaction that comes from knowing who we belong to. Joy and satisfaction are not a direct product of one's work or skill, but it's in a relationship with God. I don't think any of us will dispute that. I don't think any of us will argue that. And having this relationship, it blesses our work, whatever we choose to do. Just kind of a general observation. In this country, United States, culture, society, call it whatever you want to call it, for one reason or another, our kids at a very early age, they are taught to grow up, try to get things that are new, nice, bigger, better. And we give them this false sense of what true security is. Do you know what I'm saying or trying to say? I see it in public education. I see it in our public schools. My kids are the products of public education. I see what they're getting exposed to, and I'm not knocking public education. My wife's a school teacher. Temporary satisfaction. Y'all been very quiet this morning. Stephen.
I can tell you, Wes, I had something I was wanting to say, so it wasn't your comment of being quiet. I was listening to a psychologist on the radio. I was driving to work. This was a couple weeks ago now. But he was covering a topic, and he has a book on it. And I've been trying to remember the name of this book. I was looking it up, trying to figure it out, because it was very interesting. But he covered the concept of joy, and that joy and the aspect of your brain that feels that joy is a learned thing. And he went back as a child when your dad would come home from work, or your mother or anything, and they bent down and they were so excited to see you, you learned that joy. But if they came home and they didn't bend down to see you, but they were enthralled in the new fill in the blank X, or they jumped immediately into work outside or whatever it was, you wouldn't learn that as joy. You would learn the work as. And so the concept and the premise of the study, the research, was that joy is a learned trait. Where we find it is a learned trait that we can, of course, reteach ourselves. But it's learned, and it's actually in the brain and the way it's developed, to where you end up passing down what you feel joy to your children, and everything is fleeting. Work, you no longer can work. Katrina was talking about that, where people hit this point where they can't work anymore. So you've lost that joy, right? That's uh-oh. Or money, well, we're going to hit points where you don't have it, or you have so much you want more. Or things, you have everything in the world is fleeting. But God, He's an endless source of, when you recognize whose you are and what He's done for you, and you understand God is everywhere with you and always and never leaves you. So you have this source of endless joy of God, and that's what you're talking about. But everything else is fleeting, but we learn it as humans. And the premise of the book was that research that pointed that out. And I've started thinking about that, and how as a dad, I've got to bring that joy in of, we're going to church. It starts out with, we're going to church to teach that, at the same time as, who is God? He made this tiny little caterpillar that my son just wants to pick up so bad. And it's like got little pins out. And it's like, well, there's poisonous one somewhere in the world, so we better not touch it. But there's a joy seeing it. And there's a joy when they find a snake outside or a bug or whatever, to help ingrain in them who made this. And it's spun my head around a little bit on how I try to lead them. But it's interesting to hear that it actually develops in your brain different per person.
Very, very good point. I appreciate that. Have you ever heard the comment, you work to live versus living to work? Have y'all ever heard that? You work to live versus living to work. We all know people in our life that they live simply so they can work. And I'm thinking, man, how sad. What a sad, sad existence. As you get older, as a general rule of thumb, you get a little bit smarter, you get a little bit wiser. Because in my case, I've just made, I guess, so many mistakes in my life. I look back and think, man, I didn't do that right, or I didn't do this right. But I'd like to think at the age I'm at now, I'm just a little bit smarter, a little bit wiser, still have an awful lot to learn. And I mean that with sincerity. But I'm starting to realize that more and more, I find true joy and happiness out of helping and serving people that need help. That maybe they don't need help in the sense of money or food, but I find joy and satisfaction out of just helping my brothers and sisters. Just a real small little example. Yesterday, Doyle and Scout and a couple of us, we had the blessing, the opportunity to help a family as they're relocating here. And it's the little things like that, you know what, it's nice to get a paycheck so I can take care of my family, but you know the joy I get out of helping people, especially my brothers, my sisters, Christians across the globe, that's where my joy. I know Batzel, Paul, others went to Louisiana. You get so much joy out of doing that, knowing that you're bringing some comfort to people that have lost everything. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, Batzel, but am I right? Guys, let's be thankful for the jobs that we have. Let's be thankful that God has blessed us with the ability to generate incomes, to provide. Let's be thankful for the transportation that we have, the homes that we live in. But let's not lose perspective. Let's realize that all those things are material. They're material things. The square footage of our home should not dictate the joy, the satisfaction, the peace, the contentment that we have in our life. Doyle?
See if I can get the mic to work without tapping. Okay. Just real quick, I know the class is winding down and doing a fantastic job, Wes. Thank you so much. We look for our satisfaction. We look for joy. We have to learn joy and things like that. But I thought just real quick to look at an overview of the text we look at. It began by looking at the wise and the fool. What do they have in common? They're both going to die. And Solomon was one, he had that wisdom. With that wisdom, he did those things. You know, he found that joy of doing these things. He amassed a great fortune. And you look at those ensuing verses, it's looking at, and he realized this, that he's at the end of his life. He's saying, I'm about to give my wealth to a fool. And you made mention of Rehoboam.
His son.
His son. I'm about to turn over him. And you'd almost seem like it's all waste. All I've done and all where I tried to find satisfaction, all these things, and he hadn't instilled in his son what was really important, and that's what really to find the place to find joy. He had, I believe in his mind, he is seeing he had been a failure. And when it's all said and done in this life, you know, to find and to teach others, as Steve was pointing out, what's really important. And it's not here and now, it's the eternal. And to live for the eternal and encourage everyone else around us to look to the eternal. And that's where we come down to that last verse you've been looking at. Where's the satisfaction going to be? It's going to be for others, doing about for others, so ultimately we can spend eternity with God in heaven. So, but
That's a great way, a great stopping point. Doyle did a fabulous job kind of connecting there, all the dots for us. I truly hope that you've been edified and encouraged as much as I have from studying Ecclesiastes, from presenting, facilitating this study. It's truly enriching my life, and I hope that you feel the same for being here this morning. So thank you for your attention, and class will be dismissed.